this is Kandia with Kandia Haynesworth Designs, and I am in the official classroom for the Sew It and Show It workshops. Today we are altering 3 hospital gowns. A woman found me on Facebook and donated a box of fabric and supplies to my studio, plus a sewing machine. And in return, she asked that I would alter her husband's hospital gowns. He is currently fighting stage 4 cancer, and she is his caregiver. She thought it would be easy bathing him and taking the hospital gown on and off of him if it was open from the back. So she asked me to close the front and open the back, and I thought it would be a good opportunity to also make this into a learning experience. Let's get started. The supplies that you're going to need for the first part of this project are pins and your sewing machine. There's no cutting involved, so this should be very easy for you to get started and on the right track. The first thing that you want to do is you want to place your pins binding both parts of the front of the hospital gown together. The one thing you want to make sure is after you have pinned the front together, you want to just kind of lift it up to make sure that you're not binding both parts of the gown together, the front and the back, that is. You don't want to pin them and then you go to sew a seam and now you have to use your seam ripper because you've made a mistake by sewing both front and back together. So just make sure that you put your hand up in between both layers of the fabric just to make sure that you haven't binded it together. And today I am using the Brother JX2517, the official sewing machine for the Sew It and Show It workshops. When you put this on the machine, the hospital gown that is, I am recommending that you remove the arm plate here, okay, just so you will have enough room just to kind of slide it through without any bulk. And when you are placing it, the gown that is onto the sewing machine, I'm recommending that you start with the neck area just so you can slide it through and get it onto the straight line like so. So this way your sewing machine is going to go this way. You don't have so much material, and by the time it gets to the point where you do have a lot of material, your project, at least the first part of your project, will be done. So I'm going to place the needle and the presser foot right in this area where the binding or sort of like a piping meets right before the pin here, and then I'm going to just place my presser foot down. But I want to show you what I'm going to start with. I want to make sure that the needle is going to be right where it meets. We're going to do a technique called the stitch in the ditch, and I'll explain that to you exactly what it is, but I want to take a closer look on where this needle is going to land for this technique. So the proper term is actually called stitching in the ditch, and this simply means stitching on the right side through a seam, which is the ditch, to fasten something underneath. So this area would be considered the ditch. So this is where we want the needle to land, and we want to just sew a seam straight in that area. And I want to say that this technique does take some practice. I don't proclaim to be an expert at this practice of or this technique called stitching in the ditch, but I do know how to do it. And I also want to say that if you attempt this technique and you, let's say if you're trying here and you're in here, don't get too upset, because once again, this is a technique that does take some practice. So, you know, you can practice it on, let's say, scrap fabric or something like that. I wouldn't necessarily try it on something that you're altering for someone, but for the most part, this does take practice. So basically, the needle must land here. So if I take the needle and I go down, I can see that the needle is landing on the brown part of this fabric. So I need to lift my presser foot up and just shift the material over slightly. And so if you focus on the needle here, you will notice that I am turning the hand wheel just to see where it's going to land, and it lands directly where I want it to land, which is that area where the fabric, the two coordinating fabrics meet, which is the in the ditch area. Okay, so I recommend that your machine, which is your brother JX2517, if you are using it, is on the smallest stitch line. So for this machine, it would be a 6. So if you want to direct your attention over to the menu here, where the wheel, I'm sorry, not the menu, the wheel, the stitch wheel, where you can select it, the stitch selector, I would say turn your wheel, your stitch selector on to 6 so you can begin stitching a small stitch line. And now I'm going to, my presser foot is already down. I'm just going to put my needle in place. And one of the things that I also want to say is that this is not something that you want to mash down very quickly onto your foot pedal, especially if you are a beginner and you don't have much experience, or if this is your first experience with stitching in the ditch. Remember, you have to control your machine speed with your foot. So if you are telling your machine to go super fast, then if you are a beginner, it may be challenging to control the machine and where it goes, and plus the fabric. So I would suggest that you start off by mashing your foot very softly, just so you can get into the direction of where your needle is going to be sewing. And so I'm going very slow just to make sure that I stay in the ditch. But then I have a button coming up, so I'm going to see if I can lift this button up and just keep on going. Even though it makes it a little bit hard to see it because that button is in the way. But I think I'm managing. And for the most part, I don't think that, you know, this needs to be tailor-made. But we do want it to be at least presentable. And you see I'm going very slowly because I'm trying to stay into that ditch area, but it doesn't seem like I am being 100%, and I forgot to take out a pin, and we don't want to ever stitch over pins. I mean, not, you can, as you see, nothing happened, but for the most part, you don't want your sewing machine needle going plunging down onto a metal pin. You just don't want any breakage or any accidents happening. So I'm just going to try to concentrate and finish this up. So as I'm finishing this, the front side of it, the one thing that I would recommend is every now and again lifting it up to make sure that you are not getting both sides and you're not sewing the front and the back together. Okay, and just remember to remove your pins as you are stitching along. I know that some people stitch with pins, but it's just not safe. Okay, and I can already see that this is not perfect, but it is done. It's going to be completed. I'm sure that anything that we're doing here is just going to help this poor woman out while she is caring for her ailing husband. So I'm just going to back stitch. Okay, so the first part of this project is complete, and even though the buttons are still in place, it has a permanent closure because we pretty much sewed it up the front. Now I'm going to turn it over, and what I think I want to do first is I want to take it to the iron board and just press it all the wrinkles out. This way I have a clean, fabric to work with, and without all these wrinkles and so forth. And this way my cut, when I cut it up the back, is going to be more accurate. Okay, so I use the yardstick that I do recommend all beginners have in their studios or their sewing spaces. I use the yardstick to make a straight line with a pencil, and that is going to be my cutting guide. Okay, so I have cut the opening following the cutting guideline that I did in the previous part of this video. And the only thing I'm going to do now is lift it and turn it over, eyeballing it at a 1/2 inch, okay? And then what I'm going to do is use my clips just to kind of help me pin it along, just a 1/2 inch all the way up, and then I'm going to take it to the iron board and press this 1/2 inch in place like so. So I'm just going to just turn this over and just make sure that we are at a 1/2 inch all the way up on both sides, and then take it to the iron board. Okay, so I've already put the first seam in, and then what I did was I rolled it again, which is making it at a 1/4 of an inch, like so, and I just clipped it together. And I'm going to take it to the sewing machine and stitch a straight line up here and a straight line up here, and then we'll all be done. So for the most part, you'll see that it will have a permanent opening on the back of it for the gown to be easily put on and easily slipped off of my client's husband. Okay, so this gown is complete, and I am very pleased the way it came out. I folded it at the 1/2 inch, and then folded it again at the 1/4 inch, and then made a final seam line up the back of the gown like so. Now the next thing I'm going to do is alter the second gown, and this gown is different. It is made differently because it have a mid-center closing. So I'm not going to do anything to the front part of the gown. I'm not going to close it up like I did on the rust colored gown. I'm just going to simply open it up from the back, fold it at a 1/2 inch, and then at a 1/4 inch, and then make the final seam. Well, 2 out of the 4 gowns that was given to me by this woman that donated the sewing machine and the supplies and the materials to my studio are complete, and I have successfully achieved what her request was, which was simply to open the backs up, and it has a nice finishing hemline on both, and it will make it so much easier in putting on these gowns and removing them from her ailing husband. And I recommend that if you want to do something like this, contact your local hospital, contact your local veteran hospital, your local hospice, and see if they could use such a service. You might not want to take on 1,000 gowns, but if you can do 10 just to make it easier for someone caring for these ailing folks, then that would be appreciated, I'm sure. That's all for today. Thank you so much for joining in. If you like this video, give it a thumbs up. Don't forget to subscribe to my channel. You can find me on Instagram, Facebook, YouTube here. You can log onto my website, and it's all Kandia Haynesworth or KandiaHaynesworth.com. Thank you so much, and until then, I'll see you next time.